Welcome everyone, and welcome Kate Compton, who is visiting the AI for Experience course from Denmark. Kate is a long-time friend of mine because of all our common interest in art and generative play. And Kate is one of the most senior people in this field and have made extremely cool things for other people to play with. And it's really a true honor to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. All right. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I think it's my third time now in Stockholm over many years. So yeah, I wanted to give a talk today about creativity, how creativity is really amazing, how we can make software tools to help people feel creative, and how terrible creativity is a beautiful kind of creativity. So people were posting about, you hear a lot of stuff about generative AI now. It's like some people have the take that generative AI now means that anyone can now be creative because now we can all make creativity at the same high level. And I'd like to say that that's erasing terrible creativity. Terrible creativity is actually a really nice thing. I did a retreat this summer, and one of the things we saw the museum in Crete that has sculptures going back to 2000 BCE. And one of the sculptures that I really loved was not a single sculpture, but a whole bunch of sculptures, where these little ceramic dogs, and the thought is that they were made for sacrifices or some kind of mass production, because they're just like little terrible dog statues that you can kind of imagine making with your fingers very quickly. So I like to think of somebody in 2000 BCE just making tiny, terrible dogs over and over again. Why were they making these terrible dogs? Was it fun to make them? Was there some commercial purpose? But just the idea that like not everything that we make and enjoy has to be good. And so in this talk, I'll show you a couple of the things that make it really valuable to support people being creative for creativity's own sake, not because you want to have some sort of grand artifact come out of it. So about me, so here's a little bit about me. I have a background, like Miriam said, that goes kind of way back. So I worked on Spore and SimCity, so I made the planets on Spore. I made a language called Tracery. So Tracery, I need to update the GitHub because a couple of the sites are getting squatted. But I made this language when I was just learning JavaScript. So you can, in fact, write your own programming language badly and then open source it. And it ended up getting used to host over 200,000 Twitter bots as of the time of death of the hosting service. And one of the things I love doing is really doing a lot of outreach for AI and creative computing. I think that games are neat, but I think that games are a much smaller category of kind of creativity software in general. Just like, all right, there's software that is being used for the fun of it. Everything from weird apps on your phone. One of my favorites is just like a sequence simulator where you just like brush sequins up and down. To things like SimCity, to things like Spore, things that are like larger games, things like Midjourney, all these things, large and small, they're just kind of weird software that you can build for people's pleasure. I got my PhD in kind of how to do this well, which the subject of my PhD was casual creators. And then I was, for 3 years, the assistant professor of instruction at Northwestern University. Now I work at a small toy company in Denmark. And can't talk about that because they're getting weird about their speaking policy. But this is all kind of my own work in here. I also do a lot of outreach. So Miriam has a couple of my zines. The zine that I think, especially anybody who's a grad student, should read is there's one called Zine Your Research, which is if you have a paper that gets into a conference, no one will read your paper. This is just the law of conferences, is nobody ever reads the papers in conferences. However, if you turn your paper into a 4-page pamphlet with some cat pictures in it and you hand them out at conferences, a surprising number of people will read your papers or will read your zine and then will have to cite your paper because it's awkward to cite a zine. So I got like way more pickup on my research through making zines than I ever did through publishing papers in proper venues. The papers and venues are good so that people have a legitimate thing to cite, but honestly, the zines were what kind of got stuff out there. So I'm always happy to kind of talk to people about zine making and why you might want to do it. I also do just, again, a lot of weird generative code. It's funny to say generative code now because now when people say generative art, they often just mean statistical models. So things that are trained on other things. This is kind of old school generativity. I have a lot of talks on that I can point y'all to separately. But the idea is that yeah, you're getting the computer to make something. Mike Cook, who's one of our friends and colleagues, he has this great phrase called "make something that makes something." Is ProcJam, is that this week or next week, or did we just miss it?
I'm not sure.
It's the 10-year anniversary of the procedural content generation jam, which can be whenever you damn well declare it to be. So you can always just make little things that make things, and it's kind of, for me, endlessly delightful. It's the joy of watching a little thing come to life. Um, and this is my mission statement. I think it's fun to have mission statements. That I've been in the AI field now for about 20 years, and it's had its ups and downs. It's bigger than it ever was, of course. And I like to think of my job as bringing AI to people that AI doesn't deserve. This is kind of a service mission. It's like not bringing everybody into STEM, like, please get rid of your dance major and come into computer science. It's like, no, what kinds of useful code or tools can I pick up and take over to the theater department such that they can use them themselves? So it's really kind of a takeout window rather than a like, oh, you have to belong to the clubhouse. So as far as that, like my research kind of took a couple of different directions. So some of y'all are just now starting off in your research journey. Are most folks undergrads? Is this undergrad? Yeah. So you are like, what is research? Research can mean like getting a master's degree or going into a PhD, but it can also just mean I'm curious about things and I want to know the answer. Like, what makes for a really good shmup game? Like, what will make people actually play through my entire level? What makes people happy about my game versus unhappy about my game? What will get my like 2-year-old sister and my great grandfather playing together? All these things are trying to find the answer to these is research. So this was kind of my research journey, some of which took place in academia. So even back in 2000, I was really interested in just how do you fit generativity into a computer? Like, how do you fit a model of the world that you care about into a computer such that the computer can generate it in an interesting way? Actually, my first procedural content generation was, I don't know if we have any Renaissance architecture junkies in here. There's an architect called Palladio who was writing at the time, and he wrote himself a fun little ontology of like what the ideal church is. And because I was taking a lot of Renaissance art classes at the time, and I was taking a computer graphics class, I was like, oh, obviously, like, nobody was doing, or like very few people were doing procedural content generation at the time. I just thought it was a neat idea to try to take these like 15th century rules for architecture and get my computer to generate some of them with middling success. And that was really neat because then it turned out computers can generate all kinds of really cool stuff. I then got us like an internship on a game that some of you may have played, although it's kind of passing generations now, called Spore. And Spore was this big, like kind of Manhattan project at Electronic Arts where they got a whole bunch of interesting people to work with Will Wright that probably would not have worked inside of a games company normally. So they had like a bunch of people from the demo scene, if anybody's a demo scene fan, that's like weird generative art from the like software piracy scene in the Netherlands in the 90s. So we had that kind of very early people who were doing procedural content generation that were like very outdoor cats that were brought indoors to work on this game. So we were doing a bunch of really cutting edge stuff. It was really amazing because again, the computer could generate things. One of the neat things that we found about this was when we shipped it, we had this thing called the Creature Creator. And the Creature Creator, I'll tell you a little bit about it later. But it made people feel so comfortable creatively that we got handwritten letters from people saying, I'd written myself off creatively, and this game made me feel like I could be creative again. And that's a wonderful question to ask yourself from a research perspective of like, oh, wow, why did people feel like that? That's an amazing thing. And I want to get that all the time. So I got really interested in basically how do computers be creative with people, and especially how do you get like people to feel creative with computers? I've often joked that like there's a couple of conferences that like Hartmut and Miriam and I go to where they talk about like, oh, is this computer creative or not? And I always joke that computers, I don't care if computers are creative because they lack the two things that I care about, which is feelings and money. So if you care about feelings and money, humans have lots of those. Computers don't have any of those. So I'm going to pay more attention to whether or not the human is feeling creative in this situation. And so then I go back to grad school because I'm kind of like, you can go into the games industry. You'll work for some money. You might make some games. Some of those games might actually ship, maybe not. You'll make a lot of games in your own free time, especially if you go into the games industry. And then at some point, you may kind of wander back out of the games industry. So I wandered back into academia when I was feeling no longer kind of fulfilled at work. And I really wanted to crack this question of how do you get people and computers to be creative together? And then during the pandemic, as many of us were, I felt really lonely and I played a lot of like Jackbox games and other online games. So the question was, wait, computers can make humans feel creative, but can they make us feel like socially creative? Can we get creative together? So really, that's kind of like what the last of my research was kind of exploring is how do you get people to socialize with each other? So I'll also talk a little bit about machine learning because there's this thing that I call the big red button moment, which is this idea that like, okay, for again, the 20 years that I've been in this field, we thought if I had a big red button and I pushed this big red button and it made a novel, I would have won. Well, we finally got it. Congrats. We can push the big red button. We can generate a novel. All right, everybody go home. You are all now professional novel writers. Why are we sitting in a classroom not reading all of the amazing novels that ChatGPT is writing us right now? Because it turns out that that's not actually what makes people enjoy creativity. So I want to get you past that idea that like, if you had a magical generator, which, hey, now you do, or even if you said like, oh, I want to make a generator to generate a game, like, what do you want to generate? What are useful things to generate? And what I always told my students was, you can think about, oh, what do I want to generate to sell? But that puts you in a bad mentality of thinking about what you can flog onto other people. Quick tutorial, if anybody has a startup or you read news about somebody who's like generating things and selling them, see how much time they spend with them. Like how much time do they spend reading their own thing, or do they only reference other people who would be consuming their thing? So if they're not talking about how much they enjoy reading the novels that their thing is generating, they're just hoping to flog some trash onto somebody else that they themselves don't want to consume. So always a really easy mechanic if you get any of these people who are like trying to get you like into their startup is just ask them how much time they spend consuming the output of it. But you can also think of like, what is there too little of in the world? What isn't there time or patience to make? So even if everybody had, as much income as they wanted, what is there still too little of? Like, what do you wish that there were more of? And you don't even need to say like, oh, I wish there were more games, but like, is there something in games, or is there some tiring part of games that you wish there were more of? So I'm going to talk about casual creators. So this is the term that I gave for my research dissertation. Naming things is a power move. So if you have like a catchy name for your research, that often helps a lot. But to do this, I had to like kind of go on a deep dive through what creativity is. And creativity is wonderfully misunderstood because it means so many different things. So we often start talking about like who is creative. And when I talked to people, there was a couple of people who I was like very close friends with. And when I talked to them about like, oh, I'm making systems to help people feel creative, they would say things like, well, creativity is a magical thing that some people have. We don't understand what it is. And like, how could you possibly help like a Picasso be more creative? And so they're thinking in this kind of what's often called historical creativity, these kinds of like, creativity is big creative people. And the rest of us muggles maybe don't have it, but they're like kind of famously creative people, and just a magic is given to some people at birth. But when you study this, actually creativity, when you think about it on a smaller scale, is something that everybody has. So humans just in their natural state are creative. You can make people uncreative, but it's usually by making them very unhappy. In the same way that you can make a dog stop barking by making it very unhappy. But humans in their natural state will create. So you can start talking about like, when are we creative? So often we're creative when we're kind of comfortable, but you can put people into situations where they feel like they are safe, and then they start creating again. So it's not that, oh, we have to like make people creative. It's we have to make a space where people's creativity just naturally arises. And this is really handy. So when we're looking at creativity, we know like lots of different things. And there's all sorts of great research on this. This is one, I love just unhinged papers. So this is one of my favorite unhinged papers. This is a guy who's doing data science on impressionist art. So he's trying to figure out when are people most creative in their careers from the impressionist artists. And he's doing this based on how much their paintings from different eras sell for. So it's like, okay, how much money did you kind of make in the year 2020 or whenever he's writing this? Oh yeah, 2001. Um, and you can actually see that like, wow, all the creativity happens in little clusters. And this is because this is actually a phenomenon that we can see is there's almost no creativity, like sort of big world-changing creativity that happens with a single person. These are often people living like in the same apartment block. So these are like clusters of people who are talking to each other. Van Gogh, everybody knows that Van Gogh was very isolated. He went to a retreat because of his like mental problems. Um, Go to the Van Gogh Museum in the Netherlands. You see all of his letters that he was writing back and forth and literally mailing paintings back and forth on a weekly basis to his friends. So for a guy in 1890, he was extremely online. So he was still creating as part of a community. So often in creativity, there's this thing called the individual, the domain, and a field. There's the idea that like, hey, you could save well, I don't know how much school costs here. I assume, I don't know if it's free or whatever, but you could at least save yourself a commute by just like learning all this stuff at home. Just like go back home, make a frozen waffle, put your feet up, watch some YouTube videos. But it turns out that actually like it helps you a lot to have a field and have, you know, longtime people, new people to teach others. All this like makes you smarter and more creative. There's a lot of stuff about this guy's name is pronounced Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, and somebody can correct me on that. That's as much as I know. And so he writes a lot about kind of these conditions of creativity. I'll skip over that bit. Yeah. Oh, wait. I keep forgetting that I'm supposed to take out this slide. Okay. This is like before I worked at before I worked at a toy company, and I need to make sure that there's no bricks involved. There's also like this interesting thing of you know, how are like so that's creativity happens in communities. There's also what's called embodied creativity, which is the idea that like, why do we have whiteboards in classrooms? Oh, there's a whiteboard back there. Good. So often you actually think in your hands. So there's like, I'm thinking with my community, I'm being creative with my community, and I'm also being creative with my hands. So often we actually have to have the thing that we're working on kind of visible to us. It's very rare that people kind of have a grand idea and then just kind of like scribe it down. So often your kind of idea pushes back on you. So these are all just different places that we know that like creativity happens. Creativity also means a bunch of different things. So if you start looking at the research in creativity, depending on what somebody is interested in, you'll see different definitions of creativity. Computational creativity used to have this definition that was, oh, it is novel and useful, that creativity is something that is new and something that is useful. I make pottery. I make bad pottery. It is neither new nor useful, but I feel creative when I'm doing it. So it's important to say like, okay, sometimes people mean virtuosic creativity. They also often, if you do like business development and you see things about creativity, they often mean professional creativity. So there's a lot of books. There's like a famous Pixar creativity book. So I used to work next door to Pixar, and so I got to like go inside of Pixar a couple of times. Let me tell you, it is not a fun and creative atmosphere. It is people working to spec. And so if somebody says like, oh, we need to develop the creative industries in Stockholm, they're not talking about like, oh, we need more virtuosic creators. They're saying like, okay, there's a particular set of industries and we want to boost those industries. Mostly, if we have those industries, you will be kind of working to spec. If you go into the games industry, if you're working in a large, like the larger the business, probably the more like clear cut your tasks are and the more you're working to spec. But again, it's still what people often call creativity. Situational creativity, one of my favorites. This is the one that we have a test for. And so if I want to say like, I think undergrads perform more creatively if they've had breakfast first, then I'll take half the room and give you a power bar and half the room and not give you a power bar. How do I test which one of you is more creative? I will give you what's called the paperclip test, which I'm now ruining you for. So you're now ruined for psychological research. And this is write down as many uses for paperclips as you can. And it's like, okay, holding paper together, earrings, fishing hook, cell phone holder, and you just kind of write down as many as you can. And then by the end, you have some number, and that's how creative you are. So just, you know, a score of how many uses for paper clips you had. So that's kind of situational creativity. It's like this is almost Reddit creativity. This is like how many weird ways have people come up with to do just strange things in life. The bit that I like is expressive creativity. This is kind of where I do a lot of my work. And this is just the idea that somebody is expressing themselves creatively. It can be doing paint by number. It can be making terrible pottery. It can be doing karaoke. It can be making games. It can be like composing symphonies, but you're mostly expressing yourself. This has all sorts of really nice effects. So a lot of the work that gets done here is recognizing that creativity has things like it makes people befriend each other. So there's a lot of like creativity research in you get new immigrants and current residents to be creative together at something that neither of them is good at, and they'll kind of bond together. It has incredibly strong health outcomes. And so if you're trying to like get people to recover from cancer or age in place better or reduce prison recidivism, all these really good like health effects come with just being quietly creative, which is great because again, you don't have to have grandma compose a symphony to be able to heal from cancer faster. You just have to have her like do some pottery. So in general, people are creative. This is really good because, we just are creative. You don't have to help people do this. But a lot of people at this point will say, not me. Everyone can create, but what you don't realize is that you can't create art without being disgusting. So if everybody's seen kind of Inside Out, the Pixar movie, you know that there's this character who appears. She appears like kind of about halfway through Riley's adolescence or Riley's childhood. And at first she says things like, okay, broccoli is disgusting. Weird smells are disgusting. And then she starts getting a little meta and she's like, okay, your parents kissing are disgusting. And then she starts talking about like who you are. So it's like your actions can be disgusting. Your artwork can be disgusting. Your singing can be disgusting. So we actually have to learn the ability to say, I can dance, I can sing, I can draw, which is what, if you ask a 5-year-old, can you dance, can you sing, can you draw, can you tell stories? They'll all say yes, because at that point they know can you is basically like, can I hold a pencil? Do I know to wiggle when the music is on? It's like, yes, I know how to do this. And then by the age of 12 or so, if you ask kind of, Hartmut, can you dance? Probably you can, but yep, see. But a lot of people will at that point have learned that they may not dance, which is great, again, because we don't have to train the 5-year-old in how to dance. We just have to suppress that disgust. So that's really good because we actually have a lot of research in this as well. There's a lot of pop culture books on like what is creativity and what prevents creativity. So there's this whole book called Art and Fear, which is kind of the classic on it. And it's like, that title just says it all. It's like what are you afraid of when you create? And yeah, so there's a bunch of like different things like being undirected, being trained to come up with the right answer, being afraid of negative judgment, running out of ideas. And the great thing is we can actually like do a lot of this with AI. So this is Spore. This is the creature creator. It was designed not by Will Wright, but by Chaim Gingold. And he took a lot of improv classes at Berkeley while he was there. So he actually like was independently going and taking like high-level improv classes. And all that is about kind of the yes and of like, when you put the arm on the creature, it looks at it as like, what a good arm. So it's just kind of constantly acknowledging you. So all of these little kind of improv tricks were about solving this problem of like, how do you basically like suppress all of these such that people's natural creativity can come through? If we talk about AI art teachers, certainly like Bob Ross is kind of a meme in America. I don't know if he's as much of a meme here, but kind of this guy who, as you are afraid of painting, tells you that you're not disgusting, that like that smudge is a beautiful smudge. It's going to be a tree. And not only is it a beautiful tree, but it wants a friend. So you should make another smudge. Just really kind of giving you permission to be whoever you are, be as disgusting as you want, that all of your creativity is valued here. So I got really into this, and this is what I like spent basically 9 years writing a dissertation on, because it turns out they just keep making casual creators. You can actually see 2 different kinds of software on here, and you can kind of see like how they're split up. So there's creativity software, which is like, costs thousands of dollars or at least a license fee. And it is uniformly dark gray and has a lot of buttons. So if you see this, probably somebody is being professionally creative. Probably the Stockholm games industry is now ranked as more creative. Over on this side, you see like a lot less UI, a lot more colors. This is one of my favorites. It's a website called Cornify. And you upload your picture, and then your only control is a button, and you can mash that button and it'll put unicorn GIFs on your picture. You don't get to choose where. That's not your problem. So you're just kind of mashing to put unicorn GIFs on things. So the kind of difference here is total control, versus flexibility and surprise. And that like, all right, if people are willing to give up the total control, then we can offer them all sorts of really fun generative stuff. So this is kind of my like academic research definition of it. Um, this is a fun term called autotelic. So autotelic means for its own purpose. So if I'm using these, like I don't go into Unity and just have some fun in Unity. Like I'm just going to enjoy the Unity UI for a little bit. Does anybody just go in and enjoy the Unity UI for a little bit some mornings? No. But you do, like play with little apps or do some painting or, sing a song to yourself while you're in the shower. So you're doing that for its own purpose and not because there's an artifact that you want to get out of it. And again, as long as people are kind of going for the experience over the artifact, then you can give them kind of power, surprise, safety, all sorts of magic. You get all sorts of interesting patterns here. So this was really interesting because I started noticing as I was kind of going across many different fields, everything from like Burning Man art to weird like stuff coming out of the MIT Media Lab to art gallery shows to even vintage toys like the Spirograph. I noticed that like a lot of the patterns were the same. Even if somebody was doing animation or if they were doing music or like whatever they were generating, it didn't matter. The patterns, often you get reduced choices. Often there's kind of a limited possibility space. If I'm just like waiting for the bus, I don't care whether I'm like making a Cornify image or I'm making like a generative motorcycle or I'm making a weird sound or I'm making like a weird pot or I'm just like playing with the sequin generator. I'm just really flexible. So you can kind of, if I open up Maya, I might be making anything. You don't know what I'm making with Maya, but you know that I'm going to want total control. So you can't help me out. The smaller the domain space, the more you can help people out. This one is one of my favorite. Playfully impossible tasks. Has anybody played Jackbox? Yes, so Jackbox games. You know that the drawing interface sucks. Would it be better if you had a pen tablet? No, because then people could actually draw well. So you feel like you have permission to draw terribly because it's the UI's fault. So that actually like helps out here. So you end up getting just like tons of these. So this is like one of the oldest or one of the kind of classic ones called KidPix, but here's like an app called Silk. Again, TKO, even things like, decks of cards. So apples to apples, Cards Against Humanity, things where you're being a little bit creative. Definitely you don't have a big domain space, but you have a lot of kind of assistance of how things work. So just overall, this is kind of the casual creators versus creativity software. Creativity software, it often starts with a blank slate because it would be super weird to open up Maya and see somebody else's 3D model in there, or open up Photoshop and see a family photo that you could work on today. That would be odd. But often in casual creators, you end up with like, prompts, challenges, things where you can kind of either do the correct answer or you can kind of counterplay a little bit. So this kind of what's hatching out of these eggs. Sure, you could draw birds, you could also draw snakes, you could draw tentacle monsters. You could ignore the prompt altogether and just like draw your own image up here. So yeah, that's kind of the TLDR on that. I do also have a 700-page dissertation that you're welcome to read. It's mostly a bunch of kind of helpful articles stapled together. So if, for example, you're making like a coloring book app, there's a chapter on like coloring books as a common metaphor on these. There's one on character creators. So if you're like, oh, I'm making a character creator for my game, there's a chapter on that. There's one on game editors. Game editors are one of the graveyards of game design. So like when people make playful game editors, that was what killed Spore. We made a game editor and it was so bad compared to our creature creator that it killed the franchise. So making an editor for people to make games with, I have a chapter on that. Please read it before you start. So yeah, or there's also a zine, which is I think 16 pages. So you can kind of get the TLDR from there. So I want to talk a little bit about social casual creators, as I know I'm rambling on a little bit too much, so I need to kind of speed up. So I really like social casual creators because they serve a function, which is to make people less lonely. And this is a thing that like we can hook into. It's like, why do people need to buy my video game? Oh wow, it's a couch co-op platformer. There's a lot of couch co-op platformers out there. So often when you're making a new game, your argument is, why should people buy this? What role does this play in their life that is not currently getting fulfilled? And maybe there is something in your couch co-op platformer that is fulfilling a need that they have that's not getting fulfilled. Maybe it's just like the best one that there ever is. But if you can find a new need, that isn't getting fulfilled enough, then you can hook your game into that. So if it's like, oh, people are not playing family games anymore, or it's really hard to engage with like teens who are on their phone, or you have a bunch of friends who are over at your place and you don't want to like have a bunch of setup, but you still want them to all play together, or your friends are going to have one of those board game nights where there's going to be like a 3 hour, like a bunch of 3 hour board games, but then there's going to be some disconnect as people arrive, and you want something for the people who arrive to kind of like drop in, drop out on. So lots of different kind of uses that you might have. So just notice when things are socially awkward and imagine what kind of game you might make for that. So casual creators, they're great because they give us permission to be creative and not be good at it. So you can suck at casual creators and it's great. So certainly we see a lot of this with social games as well, where just the more terrible you draw in Jackbox, the better you are at Jackbox. If you ever played Jackbox with like people who are slightly too good at drawing, it kind of feels bad. Like, stop it, stop drawing well. You should draw a horrible little something. And it turns out that all these things that were true of casual creator issues, like creativity issues, I think are also true of social issues. So like all these things of like, oh, have you ever been at a wedding and you just kind of, you're in a conversation and you feel undirected, you feel like you're supposed to come up with the right answer, or you're on a date and you're being afraid of negative judgment, or you're running out of ideas. So, okay, all these things also make us feel that kind of like self-disgust of like, we're doing conversation wrong. And of course, there's also all sorts of solutions for that. So we make all sorts of like, books on basically the casual creators of social interaction. Like, what are some easy things for people to do at this party such that everybody feels like they're doing social right? And a lot of these come straight out of this book, Impro. I'm not sure when it developed the V. So Impro is the book that kind of like established what improv theater is. And a lot of it was him trying to get people comfortable on stage. And he specifically taught Oxford students. And he said that Oxford students had a very high kind of self-image. So if you have an Oxford student, they want to get an A in theater. And getting an A in theater is the wrong thing to come into improv with. So like, how do you actually get them to, he found a lot of like mask theory was very helpful. So get an Oxford student to put on a mask of a non-Oxford student, and then they can like relax. So allowing you to kind of have permission to be disgusting again. Turns out there's all sorts of stuff you can harvest from this. So all these different things that make people feel more comfortable creatively. You can get a lot of these just like straight out of improv, but also like a lot of things like rituals, having the magic circle. The magic circle is like that, if we play Settlers of Catan together and I steal from you, you're not allowed to hold that against me after this game, because all of us are terrible while we're playing Settlers of Catan, and that's okay. So this kind of idea that like, okay, in this magical circle, if we play Twister, it's okay to kind of like make body contact with each other. Like, that's safe inside of the magic circle. So the question here is, what is karaoke for? It's certainly not to make music. If we need music, we have as many streaming services as we want. Nobody needs more Taylor Swift music not sung by Taylor Swift. We're good. We're done and dusted. So karaoke is it's very autotelic. Has anybody ever watched video of themselves doing karaoke? No, doesn't that sound horrifying? So again, it's definitely not about getting something at the end of karaoke. And you'll often notice this when people like try to sell you like ML stuff. It's like, oh, like we're going to take what you did and then like look back at it in some way. It's like, recognize that there's some things that are just about the experience and feeling good about your karaoke. You feel qualified at karaoke, even if like looking back on it, you would have been terrible. So it's kind of all about the feeling. So karaoke actually has this wonderful thing that I'm calling, or there is a kind of common principle in these. I'm calling the virtuosity threat. So I coin a lot of my own terms. Virtuosity threat is that somebody might actually be good at this, and then suddenly you have the pressure to be good at it. So the more everybody is known to be bad at something, the more everybody feels permission to be bad. So we've all seen, like, if we go to karaoke with somebody who's quite good at karaoke, that karaoke is then slightly less fun. So yeah, it's about sounding terrible together. Just checking the time. Yep. So one of the nice things here is we don't have to invent new kinds of social games. So if you're like, oh, how am I going to kind of make social games in whatever genre I like that kind of get these principles? this is too much stuff in one slide, but this is a bunch of things that I kind of found from different games that people play with each other socially. And games here I'm using very loosely. So things like, we're playing Twister, we're playing Cards Against Humanity. So this has a principle I call blamewashing, which is the idea that like, oh, a system made me do something. So I play some Cards Against Humanity and I lay down something like super offensive. I'm kind of blaming the cards. So I've had some colleagues who work with like awkwardness and they have people kind of do theater games together. And they do a lot of different ways to have the system absorb some of the blame. So very useful with AI. This one was big during the pandemics, chat pets and cheese plates. Is the idea that like when you're all in a group together, why is it so nice to have a dog come in? Because suddenly everybody can talk about the dog. You have a bunch of like very easy social interactions that are like, what's the dog's name? Is it a good dog? What kind of dog is that? You can always just like look at the dog and you're doing the party correctly. So kind of things where there is an easy option. This is also why we have cheese plates at parties. So like, why do you have at a party like a big plate with like lots of little food? You could just have a stack of burritos. That's a way more efficient way to get people fed. But the role of a cheese plate at a party is actually so that the two most boring people, so the most boring person at a party can come and stand by the cheese plate and look at the cheese. And then the second most boring person at the party can come up and say, oh, figs, that's unusual. And then they can now have a conversation about what kinds of cheese you often see at a cheese plate. So it's basically a big pile of like easy conversational moves for people to make together. This is great because like if you're not serving food at your party for whatever reason, you can have a puzzle, you can have a bunch of craft supplies, you can have like anything where people are kind of dropping in and out and doing like small fidgety actions. If you do outdoor games festivals, if anybody's into that sort of thing, one of the most powerful kinds of games you can make is basically a cheese plate that can absorb people coming in, building a little something or playing a little something of the game and then wandering out and discussing that with each other. So these sorts of games are really popular at outdoor games festivals because as people are waiting for other games or waiting for their group to arrive, everyone just plays a little game and kind of socializes a little bit. So now I just want to kind of finally talk about machine learning. So machine learning, it's a thing. One of my friends came up with this wonderful term called largo-langle-mangles. So if you want to derisive, like I think it's very important that anything that affects your life, you have a derisive term for. So whenever people are talking about largo-langle-mangles, you can like, make fun of it. And so, yeah, what can we make with, like, what kinds of games can we play with these? So if casual creators are like, okay, we're going to use a system and the system is going to help us be creative in some way, or at least make us feel like we're powerfully creative in some way, can ML also help with that? It's certainly a lot of the ones that I showed you are using these kind of older models that don't have statistical models in them. So obviously we should be even more powerful now that we have like big models. Okay. So I did do a whole 15-minute TED talk on this. But one of the things in that TED talk was we can think about these large models as a space. So if I have some sort of space of content, there's a bunch of interesting games that people have been able to play over time. So this is actually a traditional algorithm called L-trees. So if anybody's heard of L-trees, this is kind of the classic way to make little virtual trees. This is a generator that I made, so it makes a bunch of L-trees, and you can see that there's a whole bunch of interesting trees in this space. So if I had like this generator, so this is like, an old-timey generator, but if I had a new generator that had a much bigger possibility space, I can play the same games with them. So a couple of just glossy GIFs from my TED talk. We can move around this space. So I can like find different things in this space. So it's basically like, what do we do with these big models? We're basically making a set of moves for them. So it's like, okay, I can move around the space. I can kind of find different things in the space. I can visualize different landmarks in the space. None of these are games yet. This is just like we're building up kind of a set of moves that we can make. So things that you can do is you can show things like relative to the current artifact. So this is actually, this flower generator that I made, it's a casual creator that I ran at parties for a while. And how do you run this at parties? It certainly isn't a game, but I would just project it on the wall. It would be attractive flowers that would just kind of gently oscillate. And then people could pick one of the flowers and it would breed more of that flower. So that's it. Very, very cheese plate. It's just kind of quietly sitting there until somebody wants to push the button and then two people can sit around talking about like which flower they should pick next. So like very casual. But the only reason that works is because we could say like, oh, what are things close by in this space? So you'll have things like there's a site called Art Breeder, which is doing the same kind of thing where I can like breed multiple versions of something in the machine learning space. So there's something in this generative space and I can make a whole bunch of it. And then there's some other interesting things where you can actually turn this mapping into a social activity. So again, this is me visualizing this just with my like toy space here. But the idea in Art Breeder is that somebody's kind of exploring through the space, finding and naming landmarks as they go, and then other people are taking that landmark and kind of building their own paths off of it. So you're kind of imagine that you're in a big natural park that nobody has ever explored before. And what activity do you run for people who are coming into this park? You know, maybe some people are building trails, maybe some people are walking along the trails and kind of like writing up like their review of the trails or writing up new signs or like going off trail a little bit to try to find new landmarks. So it's basically a big game where everybody is like wandering together, exploring a space. So yeah, here's some of the UI from this was so why do we study these old-fashioned models? Because all the UI, all these social principles, all these work whether or not you're like whatever kind of algorithm you have in the center. So this is one from what is it? 2000s, early 2000s was Pick Breeder. So Pick Breeder was made by Ken Stanley's group, and they do a lot of kind of this sort of like interesting machine learning with cool UI work. And it made really bad generative art. So this is about as good as you can get like in 2005. So you can make these weird little generative arts. But then people would label the ones that they thought were good, and then people could kind of branch off of those. So it's like, okay, they got like a good little social network that was working well. And then Joel Simon later on, he gets like, so he's a big fan of this. Generative like GANs, so it was originally called GAN Breeder. So GANs come in and can now make better art. But he notices like, oh, actually, there's nothing about the little like art generator here that I need, except the fact that like I can make things nearby, and then I can just like port all of the good social stuff to a new experience. So basically, like I'm taking out my vintage diesel car, and I just swap out the engine for a new electric engine, and now it can go twice as fast with no emissions. So a lot of these kind of older systems, you can look at those and say like, okay, that was working really well with a terrible engine. Can I swap out that engine and still get all the good social stuff, all the good casual creator stuff? So you can make games about like what's in the space. So this is one that Max Kreminski made called Blabrex. And this is it's a game that like sockets onto Scrabble. So if you're bored with playing Scrabble with your friends, you can kind of use this site with your Scrabble board. And you still have to make words, but you have to make words that sound like they're words but aren't real words. So this is a badly trained machine learning model that then basically like can poorly detect whether or not a word is an English word. So it'll check if it is an English word, you're not allowed to play it, but then you have to make it such that a badly trained model will think that it's an English word. And then our house rule was you have to then define what the word is when you play it. I don't remember what I put these images in for. So yeah, it's kind of like one of the principles here is that a shit machine learning model is actually much more entertaining than a good machine learning model. So a bad machine learning model is actually like in that kind of virtuosity threat thing. The bad model is often more fun than the good model. Like notice how nobody's pasting like ChatGPT text back and forth to each other anymore because like it's useful, but it's no longer funny. So as things get better and better, they're no longer like as entertaining. They can become good tools, but like any of the ones that were really disappointing, pull them out and use them as weird toys for people to kick around. This is just a giant slide that I made. If anybody wants to take a screenshot of it, these are all the different existing game genres and game mechanics I've found for having multiple people being creative together, and then what roles there are such that you can just socket in an AI in different ways. So kind of the idea of like, let's see, who votes for whether or not something is a right answer. And there's all sorts of different ones from like Family Feud to Newlywed Game of like, can you predict what somebody else will predict? Is there a rotating judge? Is there a classifier model? Is there like a secret vote? Are you allowed to try to persuade people like werewolf? So just kind of like a lot of this is as many options as I could possibly find for all this stuff. And yeah, um, I won't go into solid and liquid art because like there's a TED talk on it now. But this basically this idea is just that in machine learning we have this kind of like space of rather than individual pieces of art, we have like a space that you're moving through. And so a lot of your kind of games that you're going to play, casual creators that you're going to play, are going to be about moving through the space and not about your final artifact. So, like, do you still save out your mid-journey images, or are you just kind of like moving through it? Like each individual image is now like less and less and less precious, but the journey is still really fun. So as you're going to make these games, you're going to notice that like they kind of become more and more autotelic. So yeah, okay, we can now have Mozart quality music and beautiful images as much as we want. But the pleasure is still going to be in the like feeling creative on the journey. So you throw out all your images at the end. Did you actually have fun still? I'll just skip all this. Um, so yeah, I think the TLDR is just like um, art itself can be a multiplayer game. So the process of making art, um, and that the art itself can be one of the players. So you can play games kind of with your art, and then you can throw out the art afterwards. So yep, that is casual creators in a nutshell. I know I got kind of like turned around a bit, but yeah, just the idea that like creativity is a really powerful force. Don't mistake the feeling of creativity for having a fancy artifact at the end. Now we can have a fancy artifact at the end without ever feeling good and creative during the process. But on the plus side, you can also feel good and creative without ever having to make a good artifact. So definitely kind of think about karaoke as a model. And then my favorite thing is just, especially if you're students making games, you can make games and spend a lot of time on point systems and mechanics and balancing and levels and a lot of like kind of the structure of games. But if you just make a weird algorithm and have people kind of like play against the algorithm, just like play with the algorithm, you can call it a casual creator and like be done. So if you ever just need to make a game jam game, sometimes just making a casual creator is a really good place to kind of start off. Don't ever think that you actually need to put all these different like game mechanics on top of something. Or notice that how many of these game mechanics are not something that the computer has to do, but just like everybody votes and says like this one is the best. Yeah, I'll stop it there and like leave room for questions. We can just take whatever questions, and if you see any from online, surface those.
Thank you, Kate. I myself am quite a lot into having a focus when I create and being present in the creative process. And I also see the benefits of casual creativity. Can you would you say that there are ways to combine these? You know, let go of the pressure, and then when you're ready for it, go into the deeper part of creativity.
Yeah. Yeah, mindfulness and creativity is a really interesting thing. So it's they're definitely very orthogonal. So if you think of, you know, I'm doing yoga, there's no thing that I'm getting out of yoga except for the mindfulness of kind of going through and listening through my body. There's a bunch of casual creators that were designed intentionally with mindfulness. So there's an kind of algorithmic way of drawing called Zentangle, which is intended to be kind of you draw a bunch of lines. We don't have quite enough room here. Oh, I don't think we have whiteboard markers either. But the idea is that you just draw a bunch of kind of intersecting lines and then you fill in patterns. And the idea is that you just kind of like focus and are aware of the lines. So it's a very embodied kind of cognition, like very embodied creativity is like I'm not focused on whether or not this thing is going to be good at the end, but I am listening very carefully to it. I am being very present. So there's that, and like most of the Zentangles end up looking very silly. But it's a really good mindfulness practice. Combining that with I want to get a really interesting piece out of this, Then you get into kind of some of the Brian Eno work where it's like, okay, he has a lot of kind of not necessarily autotelic, but different, very nearly casual creator systems to try to help him get outside of his normal working mode. Um, he wants to get like a good symphony or a good piece of music out of that, but he's very focused on kind of being present with his decisions and then making decisions outside of what he would normally make. And then the idea is that then that allows him to kind of access new parts of the possibility space. But yeah, it's definitely very orthogonal. I would say, yeah, I think that's it. They're two things, but the flavors often work well together.
Yeah, all of you, because sometimes it's helpful to take a break from your own brain. Yeah.
It's when are you looking at the artifact and when are you feeling your process? And I think probably for a lot of people, just focusing on the product, they'll end up clenching up too much. And sometimes focusing on the process allows you to, yeah, either both be more present autotelically and then get to a different space for the artifact.
So something you brought up the pick breeder can stand
Mm-hmm.
and then you said the name of the one who created it, but I wasn't quick enough to write it down.
Yeah, okay. Oh, right. So this is, yep. Actually, Art Breeder is Joel Simon. And Art Breeder is great because it's like an ongoing project and he keeps adding kind of new experiments.
So in case you were kind of, if you were to pick like an old system of your and kind of feed something, a new kind of engine to it.
Yeah.
Would you like ever consider doing that?
Oh yeah. There's kind of I think of, and this is what the generometers are for. This is like the system of card decks that she showed earlier. It's the idea is that you kind of map out your system as a set of like generative steps, and then it makes it very clear like when a different generative step can snap in. So when are all the connections the same, and you could just switch out a different piece. So for example, I have my trace string language, very simple generative grammar that was one of my first projects in JavaScript. That ends up being a really useful piece for all kinds of different things, and so it's fun to have generative text that I have very tight control over, and then using ChatGPT to kind of like riff on that. So I do a lot of things where I have some traditional form of giving structure. So either using an ontology or even doing things like using tarot cards. So something where like I'm getting the structure from some sort of external thing and then saying, okay, ChatGPT, I want you to kind of like smooth between the structure or tell me like kind of expand out this structure. So yeah, there's a lot of things that like all the machine learned models provide really excellent glue for a lot of the stuff that like, the three of us have been working in this field for many years now. And there were a lot of traditional works like, Tailspin or Facade, where it's like, oh man, they got like very nearly to where we wanted them to get, or they stalled out, or like they had a really grand idea and they kind of stalled out because of annoying things like, not being able to conjugate verbs or like spending a lot of time on conjugating verbs. Or something like Storyteller, which is a game that's now on Netflix, but it spent, I believe, 14 years in development because it was just solving a really hard problem with the tools available at the time. And maybe you can now riff on that faster than 14 years using modern models. So there's a lot of things that like it was possible for us with kind of traditional structures to get most of the way there. And then noticing like anybody who's a kind of historian of all of these older systems, noticing which ones had a really interesting idea but couldn't quite get there because there was just this impossible gap that you couldn't get over, and noticing which of these impossible gaps we now have just the right amount of glue to fill. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
accessible in both the duality of like controllability and creativity.
Yeah.
Any good example of an app or a utility that has done it really well? Like,
Yeah, there's a very common pattern that I think of as kind of sliding drawers. So you start with a very simple UI, and then parts of it slide out. So somebody who just comes into it. So if you've ever played the game Cookie Clicker or any of the idle games, you know that you start with like Cookie Clicker. You just start with a large cookie, and you can click on it, and that's it. You feel like you're good at this game, and then as you play more of the game, new parts of the UI slide out. So I think there's probably a lot of them that um, uh, use kind of this sliding drawers model to say like, okay, if you need control, I'm going to slide something out, but mostly I'm just going to like kind of let you vibe. I think often you'll have little sections of casual creatorness. Like so in Photoshop, there used to be a terrible mosaic filter. It was like a single button and it would like do a weird generative art, like old-timey generative art on your art. Um, it had no legitimate reason to exist except that it was just kind of a fun button to press. So that was just like a little casual creator moment inside of a serious tool. Yeah, so I think you'll often see like little bits of casual creatorness inside of a more serious tool. I think they often do fight each other, just because wanting to have generativity and surprise, and have kind of a hand, like having something that's like dancing with me. There's kind of the famous example of Clippy, which is now before everyone's time. But Clippy was a little chatbot that would pop up in Microsoft Word and try to help you through using Microsoft Word. And it was actually like what did get recognized was it was actually quite good for new users who actually did need that help. But because it popped up for new users and people who are trying to get their jobs done at the same rate, so it ended up interrupting a lot of people. Like you don't want a casual creator to come in when you're trying to get serious work done. Yeah, I don't know which era, but yeah, approximately then. Yeah. So I think having something where if it's got a really robust sense of when do you want control and when do you want um, a little weird AI to kind of come in and mess things up for you, because sometimes you do. Like that's a wonderful part of the casual creator. It's like, oh, like now the system is kind of pushing back on me. But yeah, you want to be very careful when you do that. Yeah.
Way ahead of me, machine learning, but I'm thinking also about what you talked about, how creativity and the hands, the connection there is important to talk also about how you work with coffee sometimes. And so I'm thinking, if I click on images and write prompts, I'm using my hands in a more two-dimensional way than I would if I use my hands for making coffee.
Yep.
Could you give examples of where you can use your hands more actively in the creative process? It should be in a virtual space.
Yeah. Let's see.
The reason I'm asking is because I think your mind finds different paths depending on how you use your hands and your body.
So the hand tracking has now gotten really good. Hand and face tracking have gotten really good. Let's see if this will run. Come on, internet. Oh well. But the hand and face, oh, here we go. So we now start face tracking. So once the model is loaded, which may be a couple moments. Oh, here we go. All right, so here we go. So this is an 8 megabyte model running on machine, and it runs on mobile devices as well, just in the browser. And so I'm getting like buttery smooth hand and face tracking. You can't tell, but like, yeah, like it's actually got all those landmarks on my face. You can do very sophisticated like lower eyelid tracking if you've ever wanted to run UI off of somebody's lower eyelid. But yeah, so I really like that we now have this ability. The question is, what do you do with it? Because certainly you could do kinds of interesting sculptural stuff with this. So it's like, there's criminal lack of virtual pottery wheels in the Oculus Quest. The fact that like, oh, having something that like I'm kind of like doing a casual creator with like full gesture. often, especially for traditional types of games, people will try to turn this into button presses, where it's like, okay, button press, button press, button press, button press. But if you instead use a casual creator, so this is like, kind of a casual creator where it's just like, I'm just making weird art with my body. This you can respond kind of very continuously to the body. And I think there's a lot of kind of, especially dance, music, just strange sculptures that you can do with that. Interestingly, two of the ones that
recording stopped.
Oh, yeah. Two of the ones that some Spore people worked on, which is what is it? Oh yeah, and we can get kicked out of the room whenever. But Tilt Brush and then was it Media? So like Tilt Brush especially, I think a fair number of people played on the Oculus Quest. Both of those were actually really good casual creators, but if you watch how they advertised them, they only got virtuosic creators. So they actually kind of shot themselves in the foot. They're like, we want to show that you can do real art on the Oculus Quest. And so they showed you what the correct way to use Tilt Brush is. And so they didn't get people just using it for meditation, just like kind of vibing. They should have shown just a bunch of like YouTubers just having a silly time drawing terribly in VR. So yeah, I think a lot of these things, the hand, like full hand creativity, there's definitely productivity tools and like traditional creativity tools that you can make with that. I think there's also a lot of just like, in the same way that when I'm doing karaoke, I feel amazing, adding a bunch of just like puppetry and hand scarves and all the like the dance costumes that make you feel like you're really good at dancing, even though you're not, because you've got a skirt that twirls around. So a lot of these kinds of secondary motion things. I think there's a lot of like, again, embodied creativity where I'm like moving with something.
Yeah, I think they're actually making the same mistake with Gravity Sketch. Diving into virtuosity while ignoring
Every single time. And this is why the casual creator stuff is useful, because it tells you, it reminds you what you're there to serve and keeps you from driving into the right choice, which each time is the wrong choice. So yeah, when we have like total neural controlled devices in 5 to 50 years or whenever they come out, and we have a sketching tool for that, somebody is probably also going to do like a virtuosic thing, and nobody will just like sketch with their brains, sketch terribly with your brains.